Welcome to the St. Matthew's Episcopal Church podcast, coming to you from Northern Virginia. We're so glad you're here. Today, we hope our message inspires you to better know and share God's love. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and join our weekly newsletter, The Friday Flash, to stay updated on all of our events and services. Let's dive in.
Well, sometimes the Bible's just wrong, isn't it? I mean, like when it talks about gentleness as a value worth cultivating in our life, as if gentleness ever changed anything. I mean, gentleness is just an excuse for people to do the same thing over and over again so that nothing ever changes, right? Maybe not. In today's gospel, Jesus continues, as we said, talking about what life is like in God's kingdom. Again, we don't live in kingdoms, aren't familiar with kingdoms, so the idea of a beautiful neighborhood is maybe more the idea in our minds of what Jesus was talking about. And so he's telling these short stories to help us understand how life in the beautiful neighborhood will be different than life in our sometimes not so beautiful world. And in today's gospel, he starts with one that says, with the story of the mustard seed, that says sometimes it's the tiniest things that make the biggest difference. Sometimes it's the tiniest things that makes the biggest difference. Like with gentleness. It might seem like a tiny little thing, but as we'll see, gentleness can make all the difference in the world. The second parable is the parable where leaven shapes the whole batch of dough. And it's really the idea, what we might speak of as contagion. Is that some things, even in tiny little amounts, will just spread like wildfire. They'll become viral. They'll change everything else. And that can be really, really bad, or it can be really, really good. If it's anger, just a little bit of anger can poison everything else. But if it's gentleness, even a little bit of gentleness goes a long way. The next two parables are about treasure. Treasure that most people overlook. They don't even realize it's there, but somebody sees it and recognizes it for what it's worth, and so they're willing to give anything and everything to have that treasure. And maybe that's a little bit like gentleness, that most people overlook it, most people don't see its worth, most people are too impatient to see the value of gentleness, because gentleness works on the long term, not so much the short term. But for those who recognize gentleness for the treasure that it is, maybe it is indeed worth giving up everything to obtain, to cultivate in our lives. And then the final parable, the parable of the dragnet, I think has everything to do with gentleness, and it's that one that where we're going to spend a little bit of time. Well, Jesus, the parable in itself is great news, and it says, this world is a mix of things. It's a beautiful world often, but it can also be a terrible world, and the things that are terrible about the world sometimes just make it really hard for us. Breaks our heart, makes it hard to even live in this world sometimes. And so what Jesus is saying is those things in this world that are bad, that are evil, that are so upsetting, one day they're all going to be taken care of. And all that's going to be left is the good stuff. And what a great day that'll be. And, people hearing that, they said, oh, we can't wait for that day. When I read this, I think, oh, I can't wait for that day. But then the question becomes, how do we get to that day? Right? That's the next question. How do we get to that day? How do we change this world, which has lots of great stuff in it, but some stuff that really needs changing? How do we change this world so that it becomes a world in which evil is no more and everything is as it should be? And many people, even in the church, have said that the way we get to that world is through violence, through warring. And violence can occur in a host of different fashions. It's not literal war. We can make war all, in a great many ways. Politics, for instance, has become a battlefield, a way of waging war. And so many people have said that the way to change this world into the world we think it should be is through violence, through waging war in some shape or fashion. And But this parable, if you look more closely, actually refutes that. Because, yes, everything's set right, but it's not till the end of time. Right now, all the fish got to swim, the good and the bad, got to swim together in the ocean. That's the first thing. And nobody wanted to hear that then, and not many people want to hear that now. But that's the first thing is, until the end, all the little fishies are in the same little ecosystem. We're all in this together, so learn to get along. All right? Second is that, in the end, the good will be separated from the bad, but you're not the one that's separating. And neither am I. And nobody wanted to hear that then, and not many people want to hear that now. But he said, you know what? That's God's business. That's not yours. God will take care of it. Trust Him. Not your business. Your business is to get along with all the other little fishies. Right? Is to love others like I have loved you. And so far from the parable commending violence, it actually, if you really look at it, and parables often, the short little stories that have surprising endings or surprising truth in them, actually speaks against the use of violence in fomenting change. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to foment change or to cause change, transformation, actually through cultivating gentleness. And I want to spend the remainder of our time looking at how gentleness really is changing the world in dramatic ways. And so I would suggest that, first of all, the only way the world ever changes, the only way the world out there ever changes is if the world in here changes. I mean, that's where all change starts. And it's got to start here. And so if I don't know how to be gentle with myself, how in the world am I ever going to know how to be gentle with you? And if my whole inner life is an inner life where I'm always screaming at myself, and, if my own inner life is one where I sound like a drill instructor, and a lot of my inner life is that way, then the whole world's going to become a scream. Because if it's in here, it has a way of working its way, and then everybody suffers for that. But if I can learn, if I don't, and this is the mistake that particularly high-powered people make, is they think, I need that inner voice to be a drill instructor because that's what motivates me and brings out the best. That's what separates me from the 99% who take it easy. That's what gets me off the couch. And so if we don't listen to the drill instructor voice, it feels self-indulgent. It feels lazy. But as it turns out, that's just simply not true. And this is one of those things that's been studied over and over again. It's been studied in the military, been studied in business, been studied in family systems. And as it turns out, that harsh inner voice only increases trauma. It only breaks down relationships. It makes everything worse. Whereas if we can learn to be gentle with ourselves and create a gentle environment in here, then we can begin to foster that gentle environment out there. And then we and our relationships tend to thrive. So it starts in here as we learn to practice gentleness in here. It moves out into the world, into our families. If we begin to learn it here, then we can create safe spaces in our families and in our relationships. The Gottmans have done a lot of work on this. John and Julie Gottman, they've got the Love Lab in not necessarily what it sounds like in Seattle, and they bring couples in and they have them go through a bunch of different scenarios, and then they just statistically measure the responses so they can predict what responses are going to be helpful and what won't be. So in real life conversations between couples or parents or in our relationships, if a conversation starts harsh, in 96% of the time it ends harsh. It doesn't go where we want it to go. And I mean, frankly, that makes sense. You come at me, I'm going to come back at you. And I might know that that's counterproductive. I might not even want to do that. But I've got 67 years of training. It's not stopping anytime soon. But if you can approach me gently, then you never activate that reptilian system back here. And then I can actually proceed through a conversation where I might be able to own some of my own stuff and be willing to change accordingly. So the conversations that start harsh, they end harsh. They don't go anywhere. They're what we call a fight. And everybody does that sometimes. Most people do. But the important thing is to be able to recognize that quickly, recognize how counterproductive it is, and switch into gentle mode. And again, they found that correspondingly, the overwhelming number of cases of conversations have a soft start, where I recognize what's good about you and I own what's wrong with me and so on and so forth. Those are productive conversations because they never activate that fight or flight, that raw ancient reptilian system, as beautiful as reptiles can be. And then it makes its way out into the world. And I just want to share a story with you in my life of one of the ways I've experienced that. And I want to amend something I said a couple of weeks ago. So a couple of weeks ago, I talked about the single person who I think is the person of greatest vision in our time. And actually, as I've thought about in relation to this sermon, I want to amend that. So a couple of weeks ago, I suggested that, and many of your eyebrows went up as I knew they would, but I suggested Elon Musk was the person of greatest vision in our time. And I think I provided some decent reasons for that. But and there was a context for that. So if you don't know the context, you can go back and listen to it, okay? So don't take that out of context. But I'm going to amend it to say the person I think of greatest vision in our time is actually Mr. Rogers. Now, some of you might not know who Mr. Rogers is, all right? So Mr. Rogers was a Pittsburgher like me who had a kids show. And he was known above all else for being gentle. And he paid a price for that. People, Eddie Murphy made fun of him. I mean, all kinds of people made fun of him for just being. And for me, who, I played football growing up. I grew up in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, it was a steel town, and you were expected to be tough. So, we played football in the field, and then the two teams would meet afterwards, and you would have a good old brawl afterwards. I mean, that was just, it happened down. And so we grew up fighting. We grew up beating one another up. We grew up to be tough. But I knew inside that didn't feel all that great. I mean, you beat a kid up, and he's got a bloody nose and a black eye, and boy, I just feel so bad afterwards. And then, of course, it's just the next person who wants to fight, and you just got to do it all over again. I was beginning to realize that didn't make much sense. And so Mr. Rogers, he presented to me a different way of being a man that I had never seen. And for me, that was a lifeline. My heart knew that I needed that. So the year's 1969. I am 13 years old, and I'm coming to that point in life where I can see that there's tons of beauty in the world. I can appreciate, how much goodness there is in people. My football coaches, I love them. They're just the best. I come from a great family, so on and so forth. But I'm also starting to see that the world can be really messed up. And that when the world is really messed up, it's really painful. And some of that pain, literally was starting to break my heart. As a teenager, you're feeling things, a lot more than, and so I feel that so deeply, and it would just make me so sad. And so 1969 was a year where there was a lot of social tension, a lot of tension between the races, some real white-black interaction. And Mr. Rogers came, and some of you will remember this episode. I remember it was like it was yesterday. 13 years old. And in private, because for me this is a little safe space, I wouldn't have admitted it out in the larger world where I wanted to still be tough. I was still watching Mr. Rogers. So Mr. Rogers, he has a little swimming pool in his backyard set. And he, in his sweater and everything else, he comes and says, "Oh, my feet are tired." And he rolls up his pants, takes off his shoes, and sits down and puts his feet in the pool. Well, no sooner he does that, and in walks Officer Clemens. Officer Clemens was an actor, but he's playing a police officer. And Fred Rogers was white. Officer Clemens was black. Yep, Officer Clemens was black. And Fred says, and the context of keeping white and black separate, particularly in things like swimming pools, Mr. Rogers says to Officer Clemens, he says, hey, my feet were tired and I was just soaking in the pool. It strikes me your feet must be tired too. Hey, do you want to soak your feet in the pool with me? And Officer Clemens says, yeah, I'd love to. So he rolls up his pants, takes off his shoes. They're sitting there putting their feet in the pool. And there is no political discourse. Not one mention of politics. There is no vicious diatribe or vitriolic, this and that and so on and so forth. All they do is talk. They talk about good memories and what they have in common. And Fred says to Mr. Rogers, says to Officer Clemens, he says, and again, it's just a different way to be a man. It was so good. He looks at Officer Clemens and says, I really love you. And he says, and there's a lot of ways to say that we love each other. And I know that it's important that one of the ways you like to tell people you love them is through song. Would you say, and Officer Clemens says, yeah. He said, may I share a song with you now? And Mr. Rogers says, oh, please do. And he sings this wonderful song. There are many ways to say I love you. There are many ways to say that I care about you. And then when it's done, they reminisce a little bit more. And I just started following Jesus, so I was familiar with the story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And Fred Rogers, as well as a TV personality, he was actually a minister and a devout follower of Jesus. His gentleness comes right out of his vision of who Jesus was. So Officer Clemens says, well, I got to get back to work. He takes his feet out of the pool, and Fred grabs a towel, reminiscent of Jesus, and says, here. And as Officer Clemens begins to dry his feet, Mr. Rogers says, may I help you, please? And he takes a towel and begins drying his black brother's feet. That changed my life, friends. I mean, I'll never forget that. That fundamentally changed who I am. The people who have argued with me, who have attacked me, who have hated on me, who have not so much. I've dug in and gotten even more firm in my ways. But gentleness, man, that's where real change happens. So a final story and a choice. You'll probably remember it, Aesop's Fables. The sun and the wind. Remember that one? Sun and the wind see a man walking one day. He's huddled up in a cloak, and the wind says to the sun, I bet I can get him to take his cloak off faster than you. And the sun says, I'll take that bet. So the wind blows against this guy, harsh and cold and cruel. And what does the man do? That's right, he pulls his cloak even tighter and refuses to let it go. Knuckles bare, and the wind blows and blows, harsh and critical and cruel, and finally gives up and says, okay, your turn. Let's see if you can do any better. And the sun just smiles and gently beams warmth. And as the man feels his heart full of that warmth and grows comfortable, he says, I don't need this anymore. And he takes it off and leaves it by the roadside. The choice is yours. Who do you want to be? The wind, harsh and critical and cruel, or the sun, gently beaming love and warmth into the lives of everyone you meet? And as for me, I know which one I choose. I hope you'll choose the same. Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, we invite you to join us for worship or any of our events. For directions, service times, and information about our online services, visit stmtts.org. That's stmtts.org. Until next time, go in peace and share God's love.